So now that we've done our small country analysis, I'm going to move on to a large country analysis. Again, what this means for us is that the home country and its actions are going to end up impacting the world price for the good. So let's start off here with our home country. All right, so here's our home market. Demand, supply. Start off with some initial world price. Now, we're going to draw our international market, or world market. I'm going to go ahead and start first by putting in our demand curve, because here nothing's different. Right? When dealing with a large or a small country, the way you derive the import demand curve is the same. You start at the autarky price, and you just go down. Right, it's our import demand curve. What is different here now, though, is our export supply curve. Right? Our export supply curve is no longer a horizontal line, but it's upward sloping. Right? So now let's say this is our initial free trade equilibrium, M0 and PW. Okay? Now the domestic country, the home country, is facing an upward sloping supply curve, right? Because it is large enough of a consumer that if it wants to consume more, the subsequent increase in the quantity that has to get exported is large enough that it's going to push the price for the good up. So now what happens when we put a tariff in place? Well, just as before, we're going to shift the export supply curve up by the amount of the tariff. And it's, again, it's a parallel shift up. The difference now is that because the supply curve is upward sloping, the price is not going to go up fully by the amount of the tariff. So when we're looking here, right, this price here is the price with the tariff. So this ends up being, we'll call it P star, plus the tariff. So what happened to the world price? Well, in order to find the world price, you just have to go back down to the original supply curve, right? The supply curve without the tariff. And so what we see here is that the world price has actually declined down to P star. Okay? So from the home country's perspective, right, for the consumers and the producers in the home country, they're still seeing an increase in the price because they're facing the new world price plus the tariff. But for the rest of the world, what they're seeing is a decline in the world price. So we're going to come back to that in a little bit, because this decline in the world price means that foreign country producers are also affected by the tariff being imposed in the home country. Right, we didn't see that before with the small country scenario. And that's why I also said in the first video segment for this chapter that we need this world market here in order to analyze what's happening, right, for the foreign country or foreign countries. But let's go ahead and go back now and put all of this into our graph here, our domestic graph. Okay, so let's say here we've got our new world price plus the tariff. And down here, that is our, right, just our new world price. So what's happening in this case? Well, now again, go back to our original. Here's our quantity demanded and our quantity supplied. Now, what's happening with our tariff in place. Remember, the relevant price for the home country consumers and producers is not the world price, the new world price, but the new world price with the tariff. So that's up here. So now what do we have going on here? Well, just as before, we're going to have our deadweight loss components, but there's something that's going to be new here. So if we're looking at, let's go ahead and just take it group by group again, starting with our consumers. So what is our change in consumer surplus? Well, initially, at this world price of PW, remember that consumer surplus is this whole big triangle. So again, we can label these areas A, B, C, and D. Right? And we're using the same labels here just to make it easier to compare the two scenarios, right? So once again, we see that consumers are losing surplus. I'm using the same labels, so they're losing A, B, C, and D. What about our producer surplus? Well, again, our producers are seeing price go from PW up to P star plus T, so they are, just as before, gaining A. So far, looks pretty much the same as the small country scenario. But what about with the change in government revenue? So now this is where it starts to get interesting. So remember, what is government revenue? It's the tariff times the quantity that's being imported. Right? Our quantity imported is here. Right? The difference between quantity demanded and supplied at the new price. Remember, the tariff is the difference between the world price, the new world price, and up here with the tariff, so it's this. Right? So this rectangle, which isn't just C, it's C plus this lower part E, right? So C is the difference between the old world price and the new world price with the tariff, right? So C is up here and E is the part of the tariff revenue that comes between the old world price and the new world price. So from the government's perspective, right, their total tariff revenue is C plus E, right? And that's net gain for them. It was before they were not getting any tariff revenue. So what's the net effect? Well, A is, once again, a transfer from consumers to producers. C is a transfer from consumers to the government. We still have our deadweight loss components, our B and D. But we also have this part E here. Right? E is the part of the government tariff revenue that is not coming at the expense of domestic consumers. So from the home country's perspective, that piece is net gain. We call E the terms of trade gain. Right? Why is it the terms of trade gain? Well, if you recall, our terms of trade, right, terms of trade is the price of a country's exports over the price of its imports. So what have we done with the tariff? With the tariff, we've ended up lowering the price of this, one of our imported goods. So it's caused the price of the import to go down, which means that that ratio, the price of exports over imports, has gone up. Right? It's improved our terms of trade because we've suppressed the world price for one of our imports through the use of this tariff. So now we don't get quite the same clear picture that we had in the small country scenario. Right? For a small country, a tariff is always welfare reducing. Right? It reduces total welfare. Now That's not always the case. It's going to depend on the size of the terms of trade gain compared to the size of our deadweight loss piece. In other words, our production and consumption distortions. But that's not the end of the story. And that's it as far as the domestic country is concerned. But that's not the total picture. Now remember, we've got our international graph here. And when we look at this, right, so you've got this triangle here. Remember, this is our deadweight loss. Remember that this here this whole thing here, this rectangle, right, that's our tariff revenue. Remember, though, this is C and E. Right? So our terms of trade gain is also being reflected down in here, and the other part of our tariff revenue is up here in C. Now, though, note we also have this triangle down here. Right? And we're going to label this little triangle as F. Right? And remember, these are losses. So what's F? Well, F is the deadweight loss for the foreign producers. Right? So when you're looking at what's happening globally, we're saying, look, domestically, it's great. Look, we might actually end up better off if we have a large enough terms of trade gain so that if E is larger than B and D, the tariff can actually be welfare improving. But where is E coming from? E's coming at the expense of the foreign producers. Right? Our terms of trade gain is a terms of trade loss for our trading partners. So for the foreign country, their net loss is actually E and that area F, which means that globally, the global deadweight loss is B, D, and F. Okay? We have three pieces to it. Now, you can't just focus on the home country anymore because our actions, or the home country's actions, have an effect on world prices and therefore have an impact on welfare in the trading partners, or in the exporting countries. Now, this raises some more interesting scenarios or possibilities for us to talk about. And you can consider what's happening with steel tariffs right now and some of the other tariffs that were recently announced on solar panels and on washing machines. We look at this and say, okay, well, what's the foreign country's take going to be on this, right? So if you're the foreign country government, you're looking at this and saying, wait a minute, you're harming our producers, you're harming our overall welfare. And the question is, well, how are they going to respond to that? Right? And that's one of the big, really big questions we have to think about. And does this possibly lead to what we refer to as a trade war? Right? Will the foreign country or foreign countries retaliate and respond in kind? And so this is something that we have to think about. And we're actually going to take a deeper look at this in a subsequent chapter when we look at free trade agreements and the logic behind those and how they can lead to a welfare improving scenario. Right? So take a good note of the distinctions between the large country analysis and the small country analysis presented earlier. The last topic to present in this chapter is import quotas. And there we're going to focus our analysis on the small country case, and we're going to draw direct comparisons between quotas and tariffs in terms of their welfare impacts on a small country that's deciding to impose these trade restrictions.